let us hope that the Maliki government understands that there is a difference between terrorist activities, which are unacceptable, and the activities of his government, which are totally inconsistent with law and civilization. So, government troops to be openly killing people, as we just saw, is unacceptable anywhere in the civilized world, and that is a lot different than a terrorist attack. So we have a moral obligation today as people to call people to task and to find out exactly what happened. Mr. Carnahan, do you have an opening statement?
Yes, I do, and I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing today and for shining a bright light on this issue. Also for leading our delegation recently to Iraq to meet with Prime Minister Maliki and officials there, as well as our own U.S. government officials, to really help get to the bottom of this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would ask Congressman Poe to take over the chair. I've been called to the floor. I have an amendment on the floor that I have to take care of. I will be returning very shortly as soon as we do business. And Mr. Poe, could you take over the chair? And I'm sure you have an opening statement as well.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to recognize my colleague, Mr. Poe from Texas, who was also in our delegation, for his commitment on this issue as well. In light of recent events, our trip to Iraq and the scheduled departure of U.S. military this December, this hearing is especially timely for us to assess not only the humanitarian situation at Camp Ashraf, but also to consider the broader issues of U.S.-Iraq policy. I'd also like to note that several Missourians are here today, including Mrs. Azam Shayari. We're happy to have you here, whose son is currently at Camp Ashraf. I want to thank you all for being here and for your insight on these issues. The history of the MEK and Camp Ashraf is one that dates back several decades. During our trip to Iraq last month, we met with numerous people regarding the slaughter at Camp Ashraf on April 8th. Not surprisingly, we heard a lot of different and conflicting stories. What is not in dispute is that over 30 Camp Ashraf residents were killed, over 300 wounded by Iraqi security forces. These killings have been widely condemned, and I concur. In the week following the killings, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights called for, quote, a full, independent, and transparent inquiry, and further added, quote, any person found responsible for the use of excessive force should be prosecuted. Again, I concur. A full, fair, and independent investigation will provide for the best means of finding a final determination of what happened, and will allow anyone found responsible to be brought to justice and help prevent future attacks. I look forward to hearing the insights of the witnesses here today regarding the human rights abuses, but also how we protect from future abuses. In 2003, the residents of Camp Ashraf had protected status under the Geneva Convention, and pursuant to the Status as a Forces Agreement between the U.S. and Iraqi governments, jurisdiction of the camp has been under Iraqi jurisdiction since 2009. With the drawdown of U.S. forces in Iraq, I believe that the UN or other independent body be given access to the camp to assess the humanitarian situation there. I'd also like to have the panel address the issues with regard to relocation of the residents. Is that an option, or is it not? And also to look at the broader implications to U.S. policy as we shift from military to a State Department-led effort focusing on diplomacy and development. With that, I'm going to submit the balance of my opening for the record so we can shift our time for the witnesses. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Appreciate the ranking member's comments, and likewise I was with Chairman Rohrbacher and the ranking member on our trip to Iraq on June the 11th. We did visit with Maliki, discussed many issues with him, and one of those issues was we wanted to go to Camp Ashraf and get the resident side of what happened to them and the camp in April. After almost 2 hours of talking, and a lot of talk, as the statement has sometimes been said, when all is said and done, more is said than done, we were not allowed to go to Camp Ashraf. He was adamant about that, and we respected his decision since he was in charge of the nation. But my question then and now is still the same. Why not? What did Maliki have to hide? If he was right about his position, and he articulated his position, I thought, quite well, why couldn't he be open-minded enough to let us get the viewpoint from the residents that lived in Camp Ashraf? And he denied us that access to those people. So it seems to me he had plenty to hide, is the reason we weren't allowed to go to Camp Ashraf and hear from the residents. When the Iraqi soldiers stormed Camp Ashraf on April the 8th, fired at the residents and ran them over with American Humvees, 36 were killed, including women and children. It was a human rights atrocity, and the U.S., with thousands of troops still fighting for peace in Iraq, has done little more than issue just a statement. It's not conducted its own investigation, hasn't asked the UN to investigate, and there is no point in the Iraqi government investigating the attack because they are the ones who ordered the attack. They certainly are going to find no fault with the action of their own military. A week after the attack, a letter with 18 members of the House to Secretary Clinton and Secretary Gates asking them to shed some light on this violent attack. It is now July. To date, there is blissful silence from the administration and have given us no answer for this inhumane attack of Iraq on the people of Iraq. I guess they are too busy bombing Libya in the name of humanity to get back with us. Instead, the administration has proposed a new relocation plan for the camp. They want to move the camp to some other location within Iraq. This is the same plan the Iranians themselves proposed years ago. We have heard how dangerous this would be to the residents of the camp. In May, I sent a letter to Secretary Clinton opposing this misguided plan. Camp Ashraf is recognized around the world as a refuge for those who oppose the Iranian regime. And if we move it within Iraq, they will lose that public recognition while leaving residents under the same control of the Army. There's something directly under our control that we can do, and that is we can take the MEK off the foreign terrorist organization list. One of the obstacles in moving Camp Ashraf to a peaceful third country is that they are still designated as terrorists by the United States. I've introduced a bipartisan legislation, HRES 60, that urges the Secretary of State to take the MEK off the foreign terrorist organization list. I have seen and been in all the classified briefings that I know of regarding the MEK, and I am not convinced that they should remain on the list. The State Department has not made their case to keep them on the list, therefore they should be removed. The MEK should not be used as a political tool to appease any dictators in the world. 83 of my colleagues agree with me. As a nation, we've promised to protect these Iranian individuals. No matter what we think of the MEK, we should all agree that no group, especially one that has given up terrorism and given up all of its weapons, deserves to have its human rights trampled on by Iraq or Iran or anyone else. We have given Iraq a democracy and freedom. It's time they start acting like they deserve it and provide safety for Camp Ashraf residents and the MEK. And I will yield to the gentleman, Mr. Filner, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe I need I would like an unanimous consent that I be allowed to officially sit here as a member of the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your courage and activism on this issue. Also, I was reading a testimony, Mr. Chairman, of our panelists in advance just to be prepared, and I noticed one of the panelists spends his whole time discrediting or trying to discredit the MEK.